Good morning. My name is Alan Franzluebbers. I'm a research ecologist with the United States Department of Agriculture, Agricultural Research Service. Thank you to Dr. Gabriel Zubringen for inviting me to present to the Argentine Association of Animal Production. I'm glad to be here. I'm going to present to you a topic of agroecological strategies to overcome challenges towards balanced production and protection. Modern agriculture has been highly productive. We see in this graphic here that there's a strong linear increase in global cereal production from 1960 to 2000. And in the 2020s, the value has achieved more than 3 billion tons per the global population. But this high production has come with high inputs to achieve this phenomenal production. It's come with large inputs of nitrogen, large inputs of phosphorus, and an enormous amount of fresh water usage for irrigated agriculture. With that, there's a problem because we need grain production to feed our livestock, but also to feed our people. And we need to have a balanced economic return. So there are high input costs, there's fossil fuel energy that's required, but unfortunately, there's also water quality issues that develop, as well as nitrous oxide emissions that occur from the emission of nitrogen from the soil back to the atmosphere, which is causing or contributing to global change. Contemporary agriculture has moved towards highly specialized monocultures. We have grain production that is focused in certain regions and focused on particular grains only, not necessarily a diversity. We have livestock that are housed in confinement operations that are highly congregated and that exclude other species and typically are not seeing the land. And then we also have highly specialized forestry systems. We're planting monocultures of trees that are planted throughout the world, and this can cause ecological issues for biodiversity. So agriculture faces this dilemma of how to balance the production of food, fiber, and feed for the animals with environmental quality. It's a huge undertaking to be able to return this balance. Our specialized agricultural systems have tipped the balance towards the food production only at the expense of the environmental quality. So I think this presentation would try to give you some evidence that we need to achieve this balance through various measures. Well, we need to consider some factors in this balance. Certainly we want to have high production and we want to protect the environment, but we also have to be considerate of the people that are making these operations on the land. And so economics is a part of it too. It has to be acceptable for farmers to actually make a profit rather than just simply do it for the goodness of the people. So production has various issues associated with them. We need to pay attention to the nutrients, the energy that goes into the system, the type of land and the land distribution, and whether that's land could be used for other purposes. Genetics is a huge part of it, and genetic improvement in our plants and animals are making good strides for better efficiency, but we have to do that within the balance of the other attributes. And so in the protection of the environment, we want to be able to have clean water. We need to have a good, healthy soil. The nature should be rich with biodiversity, and maybe we need to have fewer chemicals that eventually come to occupy our bodies as well. As far as the people, we need to have a culture that's appropriate. We want our farming culture to be rich, to be having high activity, to be interacting with other sectors of the society. Certainly we want it to be profitable. We need to have labor involved in this operation. Mechanization is not our only strategy for the future. We need to make sure that people have good paying jobs and good work just to be able to work on the farm. And policies need to inform that. We need to have both short-term goals to make profit and to see if we can actually change our trajectory on environmental quality, but we certainly need to look for the future and making sure that our trajectory is sustainable. Well, there are a number of factors forcing a change in the approach that we have. So contemporary agriculture is what it is, but it doesn't mean, at least in the United States and other industrial countries, that we need to maybe consider other approaches, because we have broken nutrient cycles. We have freshwater contamination. We have aquifers that are drying up. And we have certainly soil degradation that needs to be improved, and that the functioning of the soil can be improved. We have also a loss of biodiversity. And animals and plants and insects are being lost at incredible rates, bird species. We have poor soil health in many cases, but we also have good soil health, so we can learn from those examples. And so we want to address these issues and make sure that the approach is balanced. We do know that we use a lot of external energy, and that energy is coming from fossil fuels. It provides us a rapid, inexpensive way, relatively inexpensive, although it's becoming more expensive, way of mechanization. But it has an impact on the environment. Certainly the CO2 in the atmosphere is largely driven by the amount of CO2 burned by fossil fuels. And then society has a desire for real, fresh, and healthier foods. This is an important aspect because farming should serve society. The food that people eat should be nutritious, and it should be healthy for them. Another important aspect is that actually the agricultural landscape is of value to people outside of the people that own it. And so agritourism can be important. It could be also just knowing where the food comes from, and local food could be a very important aspect of the future farming. And certainly the culture of agriculture is rich, has been rich in the past, and it could be rich in the future. I believe that the future of farming has to involve agroecology. And agroecology is the use of ecological principles to sustainably design and manage agricultural systems. Now, how that looks may be very different in different environments, because the environmental conditions need to be the driving force for selecting various practices. But it could be that animals are grazing on the landscape. It could be that trees and grass and crops are all grown together in a spatial distribution on the landscape, and maybe appropriately to be able to mitigate against some of the negative environmental conditions. Sod-based rotations should be a part of agriculture. We know that for a long history, the forage-based agriculture can give great benefits to soil health, and soil is the essential element for producing good agricultural production over time. Certainly our communities need to be robust, so neighbor trading might be important, and specific practices on the land, such as cover crops in row cropping systems, are really important because we need to capture as much sunlight as possible. And certainly manure application and crop residue harvest, those need to be cycled back onto the land and utilized effectively. So all of these approaches are part of agroecology. The agroecology, again, is a system, how we manage it together. In the fifth National Climate Assessment in the United States, in the Chapter 11 on agriculture, food systems, and rural communities, we described this agroecology as a combined of three components. The biophysical, which most farmers would be most in tune with, but also the technological, whether that's equipment or GPS activity, and the social aspects. All three of these are really important. So we want to have sustained productivity, we want to have diversified landscapes, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, because it's our planet together. Enhanced soil health is the fundamental basis for good agricultural productivity. And so we don't want to have high agricultural productivity, but at the expense of diminishing our soil resources. We need to reduce soil erosion. We want to have cleaner water. And certainly we don't want to have pests, but when they do occur, we need to make sure that we can effectively control them. But there are ecological ways of controlling pests as well. And we want to have farming systems that are reliably profitable, with healthier people and vibrant rural communities. So agriculture is deploying a diversity of conservation agricultural practices to achieve both productivity and environmental quality. So these practices are climate-smart agricultural outcomes balanced with improved ecosystem services and rural livelihoods. All of these things are what we really desire, and we need to approach it in a landscape level. So ecosystem services have been defined before, and it's because we have one planet. We don't have any place else to go. We have the lithosphere underlying us. We have the hydrosphere, which is the water cycle driving our plant and animal activities. The atmosphere supplying the carbon dioxide and the oxygen that we as people need, and the biosphere that's rich with plant communities and animal communities. And central to all of this is the soil. So provisioning services are the products that are produced. The regulating services are how ecosystem processes are controlled by the climate, the water, and human diseases. And supporting services are those that help support all of the processes and produce our goods. And the cultural services are those non-material benefits through human interaction, aesthetic experience, and spiritual development. Soil health is really this integration of production and protection, the environmental protection. We want to produce plants for food and fiber. We need to have a water quality that's suitable for our human activities. We need to ensure that nutrients are cycled effectively, because nutrients cost something, so why would we want to apply them when we can actually protect them? So we want to have good water supply and plant growth promoting compounds. Soil provides this animal habitat, things that we do and do not see, the large animals as well as the small critters in the soil. And it's certainly a reservoir for carbon and nitrogen, very important for stabilizing our planet and buffering against toxic accumulation. It serves as a reservoir of biodiversity. And I want to bring your attention now to a few processes that are important. First, productivity is important. Agricultural productivity, that's the foundation of agriculture. We produce things that are good for humans. There's also the aspect of nutrient cycling, because any plant, any animal has to have nutrients, and the cycling is important to understand. There's also the idea of water relations. Plants need water, all animals need water. And then we have the greenhouse gas regulation. So this is important because our atmosphere is affecting the climate, and our atmosphere is important because it supplies the carbon dioxide necessary for plants. And the biodiversity enhancement has to be an issue because we're losing biodiversity at a rapid rate, and we don't, unfortunately, know what the impacts of those losses might be for us. So all of these aspects are really mitigated and controlled by soil organic matter. And soil organic matter is 58% carbon. So carbon is the essence of life. Carbon is what we should study so that we can understand all of these things that help our planet produce good things for the people of our planet. This example here on productivity is taken from the Marl research plots in Illinois in the United States. In this case here, they had continuous corn-oat rotation, and corn-oat hay rotation, and they had them without amendments and then with amendments. And you see that in the phase 4 of this cycle, which started back in the 1900s, the late 1800s, that the phase 4 was from 1968 to 1998. And what you see here is that the corn grain yield increased with increasing soil organic carbon because the crop rotation impacted the carbon in the soil. And so that crop rotation, although it was also a function of influencing corn grain yield, it also influenced the baseline condition of the soil organic carbon. So more carbon led to greater production. When they looked at the phase 5 from 1999 to 2009, they also saw the same increase, but of course there was an improvement because of genetic improvements in plant materials. As far as nutrient cycling, I want to share with you some results here of net nitrogen mineralization in the soil that increased from around 76 at the beginning of a pasture establishment, and then increased more than double the net nitrogen mineralization potential if we had older pastures. And so older pastures are storing nutrients in the soil, and they're releasing that at a slow rate. Now, the reason that the nitrogen mineralization was increasing is really because of the organic matter in soil, the soil organic carbon in this case. here. It's depicted here, where there's a strong increase that occurred in the first 10 years or so, and then a smaller increase that occurs over time. So there's becoming a more steady state accumulation of organic carbon. So the carbon sequestration in the first 5 years could be indicated as 1.8 megagrams of carbon per hectare per year. And in the 0 to 10 years, it would be 1.07. So you see this declining number because of the curvature in the regression. And 0 to 20 at 0.65, 0 to 30 at 0.47, and 0 to 40, 0.38. And over a 50-year period, it would be 1/3 of a ton of carbon per hectare per year. So a very significant amount of carbon that occurs. And if we only look at the first 5 years, that might be the rotation that you're looking for. And that would be a larger accumulation of carbon on a yearly basis. But it might not lead to the full appreciation of that carbon over a longer period of time. But if you wanted to rotate with crops, then the accumulation would be significant. The water holding capacity of soil can be greatly affected by the organic matter. In this case, I'm showing you here on the horizontal axis the total nitrogen, the total soil nitrogen that is a reflection of the organic matter. And the gravimetric soil water content at water holding capacity is greatly affected by this organic matter. You see here that there's a large increase when organic matter is extremely low. There's a very large increase in water holding capacity, and then there's a steady state linear increase that occurs with increasing organic matter. But typically, good fertile soils will have still an increase in water holding capacity that is beneficial to plant productivity. As far as managing diversity, I wanted to bring your attention to a study that I conducted in the state of Georgia in the southeastern United States, where we had we interseeded tall fescue into a Bermuda grass sod. So in this image here, the browner material is the Bermuda grass in the springtime, and the tall fescue that occurred, that was greening up in the springtime when the Bermuda grass is not growing. It's a complicated study, but I'm going to bring you to your attention to 4 different scenarios that we had. We basically, I'm showing here on the vertical axis, the percent basal area of tall fescue, of bare ground, of coastal Bermuda grass, and of weeds. And in the beginning of the study, when we interseeded the tall fescue, we had little tall fescue. There was hardly any there, but we had a lot of weed material and some coastal Bermuda grass and some bare ground. So this was under a hayed condition. And at the end of 7 years, we had a great increase in tall fescue component. We had a slight increase in the bare ground, and we had a reduction in the coastal Bermuda grass and very limited amount of weeds, undesirable species that we would consider weeds, that was reduced because we replaced that with the tall fescue. So that was a positive outcome. Now, if we turn our attention to the unharvested situation where we actually were not harvesting the forage at all, it was a conservation approach, we saw a great increase in the tall fescue that occurred. Up to 75% of the basal area was tall fescue, maybe actually a little bit too much, because this was an endophyte infected tall fescue that might not be so desirable for animal intake. But we had a stable amount of bare ground in the spaces in between. We reduced the weed pressure considerably, or the undesirable species, but we also reduced the Bermuda grass considerably. And essentially, we had no Bermuda grass left at the end of 7 years because the tall fescue simply dominated. When we introduced animals on this pasture, which had animals before, but in this case we're introducing that tall fescue, we have low grazing pressure, and we also increase the tall fescue. We maintain some of the Bermuda grass, so there's about twice as much tall fescue as Bermuda grass in this case. We've reduced the undesirable species, and we've reduced the bare ground considerably as well, because the forage sward is being grazed down, and so our undesirables could be grazed as well. and just simply replaced with desirable species. And then when we had high grazing pressure, we had a more balanced approach where we had 50% Bermuda grass and 50% tall fescue. So depending upon your goals on the farming operation, you can manipulate the forage sward simply by having animals and then having a different grazing pressure. So these results show that management is the key to having a sustainable production in the future. As far as reducing greenhouse gas emissions through soil organic carbon accumulation, we did a study across the state of North Carolina at 25 different research station locations. And soil organic matter accumulation occurred with, and this is a root zone enrichment. This is calculating carbon accumulation independent of the baseline condition, and that baseline condition is basically the carbon concentration at 30 centimeter depth, and that becomes the baseline condition. So this is the accumulation during the recent contemporary management. So conventional till cropland had 11 tons per hectare that was accumulated over the baseline condition, but it was a small amount compared to no-till cropland. So no-till cropland, we had about twice as much carbon that accumulated over the baseline condition. Grassland accumulated another roughly 3 times as much as the conventional till cropland, and woodland nearly 4 times as much as the conventional till cropland. So certainly land use can have a major impact on the carbon accumulation in the soil, and it can also have an impact on the nitrogen. So the same trends were occurring: no-till cropland greater than conventional till cropland, grassland greater than no-till cropland, but curiously, grassland having more than under the woodland. And so the woodlands are not a fertilized land use, and not necessarily that the fertilization is the issue, but woodlands are nitrogen starved. And that nitrogen starvation leads to higher carbon to nitrogen ratios, and the grassland having a more rich soil organic matter surface that cycles probably a little bit more. And so grasslands can be more productive than woodlands in some ways. So the issue of distribution around the planet is that genetics, environment, management, and social considerations are really important. There's not one solution that's going to fit all needs. So there are no uniform prescriptions. If we think that no tillage can work everywhere, it's possible that it might, but it probably has a different impact on the environment in different areas. We need to understand our environmental limitations. So climate would be the key one, where temperature and moisture determine what the plant productivity might be, and that might determine what livestock species might be present, and what kind of operation one might have for a sustainable use on a farm. So understanding those environmental limitations are important. We need to adapt to our social settings. If our cultural values are such that we prefer to have confinement, then that can occur. But we might have other social settings where the economics are that there's simply not ability to have a diversified operation because the markets are simply not there. So we need to understand what those social settings might be. We also need to think and plan holistically. So we need to think holistically because the future depends on a vision. We need to plan to achieve that vision for the future. So thinking not only for today, it's sometimes difficult to get past that, but we need to think for the future as well. And I believe that we need to learn from our failures and certainly from our successes. So on our own farms, we can learn from our failures, but we can also learn from the successes that others might be sharing with us. And so we need to learn from others by reading, by listening, by watching. And I think it's also important to think that we should also try new approaches, because I don't think there's anything that's going to be static in our farming operations. So we might need to look for cases where we can improve with time. And I think the available resources are an important aspect, because not all regions of the world have the available resources to conduct agriculture in the same way. So we need to know what the resources are in our region. Maybe we have organic resources that we could use on our farm, because those resources could be valuable for our farming operation. So the agroecological options really do involve integrated crop livestock systems. We need to have more of the integration, and we can have that through animal manure application to cropland. Certainly that's used around the world, but we need to use it strategically and to our effective use. Grazing of cover crops can be a really valuable operation in many parts of the world. It depends on the precipitation and the temperature regime, but those cover crops can be nourished. They can actually be nourished more than maybe the grain crops or the fiber crops, so that the cycling of the nutrients can be carried over. And so grazing of those cover crops might be a really valuable approach. Sod-based rotations are a key for the future, I believe. We've many parts of the world, certainly in the United States, we've abandoned the sod-based rotation, and I think that's something that we can bring back and actually bring more vitality to the soil. Certainly dual-purpose grain crops where we have both grazing and grain are an option, where the environmental conditions, the climatic conditions might dictate whether we graze out a small grain or we grow it to full maturity. In many regions, grazing of crop residues can be a valuable source of nutrient for livestock, certainly ruminant livestock, and then particularly with corn residues, sorghum residues, and other cereal grains. Agroforestry and silvopastorils should be a part of the landscape. Certainly trees provide benefit to the comfort of the animal, but also simply to the landscape diversity and attracting wildlife. There can be among farm cooperation between crop and livestock producers, and that depends on the neighbors and their willingness to participate with each other, but it's something that cooperatives could be developed accordingly. And certainly we could think about regional exchange of animal manures, bioenergy, byproducts, and feedstuffs. In the long run, sustainability is a process. It's not an endpoint. We can't truly say that any one system is sustainable at this point in time, because we should always be thinking that it's going to improve. But I think there are some simple steps, relatively simple steps, that could be taken. Certainly the transformation of conventional tilled agricultural systems to a no-till system should be the first step. We need to keep the soil covered because there are so many great benefits to soil health and water quality that are derived from that. We need to add cover crops. It's another simple step that really can be worked out, but there are learning steps that need to take place, and so we need to get that step into there. We need to have diverse crop rotations, planting more than one crop, because that's going to help control our weed pressure and our other pest pressures. Sod-based rotations are really a foundation of a sustainable system because we're building up the organic matter in the surface, and that can be of our advantage. And then certainly integrating crops and livestock together through those sod-based rotations and using all of the conservation approaches is important. Now, when we add trees to the landscape, we can do that in a very strategic manner, and we can do it in a manner that is focused solely on the trees too, as forestry plantations. But certainly that's a possibility. So there are some guiding principles for looking to the future, and I think the soil health principles that the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service has proposed are really good. We need to minimize disturbance, we need to maximize soil cover, we need to maximize biodiversity, and we need to maximize continuous living roots. Those four soil health principles are really important. But fundamentally, when we think at a broader level, we just need to capture as much sunlight as possible because our solar panels are the plants that we grow. We need to make sure that our plants are very robust and effective in capturing sunlight all year long, if possible. We need to feed the soil. That feeding the soil means that carbon is re-entering the soil and it's also capturing nutrients so that they can cycle biologically. That's how we're going to keep those nutrients in the soil and not running off or entering our water bodies. We need to basically cycle everything. Now, there are maybe some limitations when we have heavy metals in the organic amendments that we might apply. That should be known, and we need to make sure that we're aware of it and maybe not apply everything. But we need to cycle as much as possible. Resources in our neighborhood, on our farm, are all possible to be able to use. We need to diversify to be able to connect the components of the ecosystem, whether that's a tree or a forage grass or an insect or a ruminant livestock. All of these things are interacting together, and we need to make sure that we're connected more than unconnected. And I think that we need to have some patience, for sure. Well, the future of farming should really focus on agroecology. And I've written this article with some colleagues, and it appears in the Agriculture and Environmental Letters Journal. It's a short, relatively short paper, and it outlines many of the things that I've discussed here today. But basically, the core ideas are that vital natural resources to sustain agriculture are being undermined by the contemporary system. Solutions to manage our food and environmental dilemma require an agroecological approach. Our focus needs to be on healing our planet and not just doing less harm than in the past, because we do need to make sure that we can have a sustainable future. I thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you, and I hope that you have a great conference. Thanks and goodbye.